Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin. He's also the publisher of thebreaker.news. Welcome back to the show, Bob.
Thank you.
Bob, on the East Coast, New Brunswick, 14 members of the NDP have defected to the Greens. Their main complaints that the new leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, hasn't bothered to visit them. Some people are saying it's racist. What are your thoughts on this? And have you ever seen such a mass defection from one party to another?
Well, that's probably the biggest bunch, especially biggest geographic bunch, to leave the NDP in this election cycle. But we've already seen various members of the NDP, high-profile MPs who would be go-to people if the NDP were to win an election and form cabinet. People like Nathan Cullen, people like Murray Rankin, people who are the senior members of the NDP caucus for BC are not running again. And that was a strong signal that there was a lack of confidence in Jagmeet Singh's leadership from the get-go, that people in the party weren't rallying around him to go for another 4 years in office with the hope of at least becoming the opposition again. That was a sign that Jagmeet Singh didn't enjoy that popularity, didn't enjoy that support. And this might go to just the way that party leaders are chosen these days. There were some questions about how Jagmeet Singh became the leader of the NDP, whether this was all about selling enough memberships at temples in the Vancouver area and temples in the Toronto area to get enough numbers in order to win the leadership election. There's been a lot of talk among some very reasonable people, although not much action, that Elections Canada should really regulate leadership contests just as it regulates elections. And same thing in BC, that Elections BC should regulate party leadership contests just like it regulates the elections. Because who knows what goes on behind the scenes. We do have some evidence that it wasn't all on the up and up when the BC Liberals chose their leader in 2011, when they chose Christy Clark to succeed Gordon Campbell. Kevin Falcon really should have won that election, but for the shenanigans with the PIN numbers and proof that was dredged up by Special Prosecutor David Butcher in the Quickwins investigation, which went beyond just the ethnic pandering scandal. It looked at how Christy Clark was chosen as leader, and he found irregularities in the system that PIN numbers were found to be in quantities in the Christy Clark campaign and attached to other members, essentially voting by proxy, when perhaps they shouldn't have been, and giving the numbers to Christy Clark on the weighted system that gave her enough to eke out a narrow win over Kevin Falcon. So that's the reality of what happened here in BC. Haven't been widespread questions of irregularities in terms of the choice of Jagmeet Singh as NDP leader, but certainly suggestions that the leadership system the NDP used to choose Jagmeet Singh was based on getting as many numbers as possible from membership sales, and he just sold a lot of memberships at temples. Temple politics rearing its head. And there's nothing wrong with getting faith groups of any type involved in an election. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Business groups, any groups. But if it's based on just getting the numbers to get the vote, and that one candidate who wins the leadership really owes everything to one constituency instead of getting wide support across the party, then that's only going to create divisions. And with Jagmeet Singh, he's a leader who has really only experience on the provincial level as an NDP member of the Ontario Provincial Parliament, yet he had the style and pizzazz that the NDP thought would be in their favor to have sort of a Canadian version of Obama, yet a Canadian turban Sikh version of Obama. And we have seen some suggestions that what happened in New Brunswick was because of racism, that some of these NDP candidates who defected to the Greens say that when they were knocking on doors and meeting people in the community, that people in New Brunswick weren't willing to vote for NDP because they weren't willing to trust a leader with the turban. There certainly is that suggestion in Quebec, because there is the law there against any religious symbols being worn by a public servant. And certainly some of that might be through what we all desire, to have separation of church and state, that faith and government should be two separate entities. But there are some there that are obviously using this to play the race card, which is wrong one way or another. And Jagmeet Singh should really be judged on his policies, and yet his policies have not been properly articulated. And that's a problem for the NDP, that Jagmeet Singh worried about getting to Parliament. He got into Parliament as the Burnaby South MP. He's from Brampton, Ontario, near Toronto, and he was airlifted into Burnaby to become the successor to Kennedy Stewart, who became the mayor of Vancouver. And I don't think he's done enough to really get to be known across the country. They're going to put a lot of stock in the campaign, which they really started rolling out this week with the slogan that we're in it for you. Of course, a cynic would say, well, why aren't you in it to win it? Or another cynic might say, well, you're a politician, you're only in it for yourself. So the NDP campaign right now doesn't look terribly strong, but then again, look at what happened 4 years ago, when at the start of summer it was looking like it was going to be Prime Minister Mulcair, but at the end of summer that started to quickly evaporate, and we ended up with a Prime Minister Trudeau. So anything can happen along the way to the ballot boxes, but when the NDP essentially loses support in one of the Atlantic provinces, and when it hasn't yet come close to filling out a dance card, basically, to filling out all of its nominees, with just over a month to go before the election day itself, with, practically less than 2 weeks before the election is going to be called, if Trudeau does wait till September 15th to actually go to the Governor General to have the writ dropped. The NDP does not look very well organized. It doesn't look like it's got a vision or a will or even a desire this time around to even come close to being the opposition party. This is a party that last week got another couple of blows on the West Coast here when Justin Trudeau flew on Air Justin at our expense to do more campaigning before the campaign. Came out here, and on one day he had a photo op with John Horgan, about $680 million of funding for electrification of resource projects up north to basically connect Site C to LNG plants in the future. And the very next day, he shows up at Vancouver City Hall with Kennedy Stewart, and Kennedy Stewart has all kinds of nice things to say. So essentially, Justin Trudeau's mission was accomplished when he took that trip to the West Coast to get the endorsement of BC's two most powerful NDP politicians. So Jagmeet Singh must not have felt terribly confident going into last Friday night's rubber stamp nomination meeting, after the two people who say they support him because they're part of the same party actually gave endorsements, for lack of a better word, to Justin Trudeau before then. So the NDP, which under Jack Layton, remember 2011, had that surprising finish, became the opposition and had lots of hope, and one of the most likable party leaders that there was at the time. Well, Jack Layton, of course, tragically died of cancer, and with that, the NDP seemed to have lost some of its hope and way forward. And now you got Jagmeet Singh running the show, and he really has to make a strong showing in the debates, and he's got to make a strong showing in whatever money they spend to get him across the country. So that he's known across the country and seen as as an average guy, as much as he's someone who is a devout Sikh, and he shows it in how he wears his turban, and being part of the Canadian mosaic. He's also got to articulate a vision that gives Canadians some kind of confidence that the NDP is in good hands and that he's worth the vote. But right now, it looks like a party that's in disarray. And if the NDP has a poor showing in this election, I think that there's going to be a lot of questions about its future.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after this.
I'm Douglas Mason, CEO of Naturally Splendid, symbol NSP on the TSX Venture Exchange. Naturally Splendid is a biotechnology and consumer products company focused on the global cannabis and health markets. Naturally Splendid is expanding distribution in this rapidly growing market with products currently in Canada, the USA, South Korea, Germany, and Australia. To view our comprehensive company presentation and for more information, please visit our website at naturallysplendid.com.
Cypress Development Corp. is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp. trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, the governor of Hong Kong says she's going to formally withdraw the extradition bill that would allow suspects to be transferred from Hong Kong to communist China. Will that placate the protesters?
I don't think it will. And saw some clips on social media last night of what's been happening every night in Hong Kong. They've been doing these protests, of course, on weekends, but on weeknights, 10 o'clock at night in Hong Kong, people open up their windows, go out their balconies, lean out the windows, and chant, essentially express their frustration with the government and express their support for the pro-democracy movement. People are not letting this go, and even last night, that's what happened. Despite this surprise that she's finally withdrawing the law, Carrie Lam is finally withdrawing the law, people are wondering why it took so long. Why did people have to protest in June, in July, and in August, and into September? Why? Why did it take so long? But at the same time, they have other demands. That's only one of the 5 demands of the pro-democracy movement. They ultimately want, key demands would be to have an investigation, independent investigation into the actions of the police. There's a lot of accusations of police brutality, as well as police inaction. We saw those very ugly scenes a while ago of the thugs in the white shirts, who everyone believed were connected to the triads, the organized crime groups, who were essentially in a wanton fashion beating people up with sticks and other weapons at transit stations, and the police were nowhere to be seen. That was something that was very scary to see. So they want an independent investigation into the actions and inactions of the police. Another important thing they want is what was promised to them: more democracy. They ultimately want universal suffrage in Hong Kong, one person, one vote. They want to be able to vote for the chief executive. Carrie Lam, the chief executive now, who is facing all this criticism, she's elected by a very small group, a couple thousand people. Most of them are handpicked through various business and cultural societies, academic societies, universities. They have delegates who helped choose her. There are elections for other functions in Hong Kong, but Hong Kongers cannot vote for the chief executive, and they want that vote because they see the chief executive as essentially being beholden to Beijing. That the chief executive, in this case Carrie Lam, they believe is just a puppet for Beijing, a puppet for the Communist Party. And we all know that they were promised under the treaty that the United Kingdom signed with Hong Kong to hand Hong Kong back to China. The idea was enshrined of one country, two systems, that as much as Hong Kong would be a Chinese possession, it would be self-governed in an autonomous fashion by the people of Hong Kong. And the people of Hong Kong have, in the last several years, seen their democracy, their hopes for democracy, what has passed for Hong Kong democracy, as well as the rule of law and the freedom of expression, the free press. They've seen erosion. And what came as the straw that broke the camel's back was this bill for the extradition law that would have allowed the Chinese government to demand certain people in Hong Kong be arrested and taken to China to face trial. And we know that that China does not have the rule of law; it has the rule by law. It is there's no separation of the government from the courts in China, and there's a lack of justice in China, and people were scared of that because that would have essentially created a chilling effect where people would not have wanted to do business in Hong Kong, would not have wanted to be part of the political discussion in Hong Kong for fear of all sorts of consequences from communist China that could have caused people to be rounded up and taken to China for trial, whereas we see how things are going in China with the two Canadian Michaels who are just stuck in a jail, isolated from their families, isolated from the lawyers, and there's no proper justice there, and it's been criticized heavily by academics and civil society groups the world over.
The Communist China consulate had a 70th birthday party for their nation. Who went from BC and who didn't?
Well, it hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
It's going to happen before October 1st. October 1st is China's National Day. This is the 70th anniversary National Day of October 1st, 1949, when Mao Zedong declared the Chinese Communist Party had essentially won the revolution and was taking power of this country, which had been ruled for many years by different emperors. Well, now they had a communist in charge. He wasn't an emperor, and he fought the struggle. And that was, in a nutshell, of course, there was a lot of bloodshed too, to the creation of communist China. Well, this year is a significant year for China under Xi Jinping, the president, because he has ambitions of turning China into a superpower to rival the United States, economically, socially, politically. They want to carve out their niche in the world, and they were going to use this occasion to promote China and tell the world how far China's come in only 70 years. In some ways, it's come farther faster than other countries have in 100 years or 200 years. So they were trying to use this as a big propaganda occasion, not just in China, where they're going to have military parades and fireworks displays, but here in British Columbia, the consulate in Vancouver has planned two events for VIPs, mostly politicians, and friends of the consulate. September 20th at the Bayshore Hotel in Vancouver, and September 24th at the Empress Hotel in Victoria. They've had these two events, and they've invited the Premier, John Horgan, to come to the event on September 20th at the Bayshore in Vancouver, and they've invited Lieutenant Governor Janet Austin to go to the September 24th event in Victoria, the Empress Hotel. And I double-checked after obtaining copies of these invitations through the Freedom of Information Law. I double-checked with Government House as well as the Office of the Premier, and to my surprise, that both the Premier and the Lieutenant Governor are not going. They apparently have other things in their schedule. That is the reason given by both the Office of the Premier and Government House. They've got other things in their schedule. They wouldn't say what those other things are. You can imagine that this will take a little bit of heat off of both of them, because China right now is not Canada's best friend. As Richard Fadden, the former CSIS, had said, they're an adversary. They're not an enemy. They're definitely not an ally, but they're an adversary, especially right now because of the jailing of the two Michaels in retaliation for the Meng Wanzhou arrest. There are the trade sanctions that they've laid against Canada as retaliation as well. And there is the situation in Xinjiang where up to 1 million Muslims have been detained for re-education. And there is also the situation in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a place where there are about 300,000 Canadians that live in Hong Kong, the biggest collection or conglomeration of Canadians outside of Canada lives in Hong Kong, and we're seeing the worries about Hong Kong right now. So now may not be a time for our leaders to be spending time with diplomats from China, especially when you've also had Brad West of Mayor Port Coquitlam sound off about another reception that the Chinese consulate is planning, and that's September 25th during the Union of BC Municipalities Convention in Vancouver. The Consulate of China spent $6,000 to sponsor the UBCM convention, and they're spending more on free booze for local government officials during this convention at a reception. That's after the BC government reception and before the one for the CUPE City Hall workers reception. And Brad West, the mayor of Port Coquitlam, put his foot down a number of months ago and said that UBCM should reject this and return this money, should not take any money from any foreign government. And, of course, he's not happy with the foreign government, especially being China, with all of its human rights problems. So, yeah, you got these three interesting receptions. A lot of government officials, other levels of government have been invited to the 70th anniversary events from the consulate, as well as the UBCM convention. It'll be interesting to see who shows up. There will be some officials from the NDP government, however, going to the event in Vancouver. Jobs Minister Bruce Ralston and Minister of State for Trade George Chow are both going on behalf of the government. So the government will have some representation. It just will not have the top official. And that will certainly be duly noted eventually by the media and others who read my story in the Breaker.news. I broke the story last week. But that will also be noted, I'm certain, in whatever reports the consulate sends back to the ambassador in Ottawa and eventually to Beijing. That's what consulates do. They report on activities that happen and their communications with local officials, and that will speak volumes if the premier and lieutenant governor do not go as I've reported that they will not go. That will be duly noted by those, and they might take that as a bit of a snub. But they should not be surprised that top officials from governments that are concerned about the Chinese human rights situation are taking a stand like that, and at least staying away and being passive.
We'll have more with Bob Mackin right after the break.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Mackin. Bob, are there certain buildings in Kerrisdale, which used to be the toniest neighborhood in Vancouver, that perhaps are kind of shameful for the community?
Indeed, we're seeing one this week that Judy Rudin noticed on Twitter and took a photo and put that out there of a $7 million mansion with a gate, a closed gate, and a sign, anonymous sign. One of the neighbors came along and basically is shaming the owner of this property on Marine Crescent in the Kerrisdale area, that the owner of the house just doesn't seem to care about their property, has let it fall into disrepair, it's boarded up. And that person wanted to send a message to the owner of the property, who lives in another expensive house nearby, as well as send a message to fellow neighbors that at least someone in the neighborhood cares about the neighborhood, and maybe everyone should shame that owner into doing something with it. If they could spend millions of dollars on the house, and the house is now worth $7 million, certainly they can dig into their pocket for some regular gardeners, and maybe find a way to take the boards off the windows and have the house safe enough to actually rent it out and let someone live there. We are still experiencing a bit of a housing crisis in Vancouver, that people of many demographics are finding it hard to find a place to live that's affordable. And when you see a house like that, where as a landlord living somewhere else in the area and not letting anyone else live in his or her house, it is very, very disconcerting. But that's not the only house in the Kerrisdale area. The southern reaches of Kerrisdale that is in that kind of state of disrepair. There's two other examples not far away in the block of Southwest Marine Drive. They've been on my radar for well over a year because at the end of July in 2018, on a Sunday morning, there was a house fire at a house which had been abandoned. It was on a property that's for sale, that's still for sale for more than $4 million. This house was a two-story house. It was several decades old, and the police arrived to see it fully involved, smoke and fire coming out every opening, and they couldn't save it. The house actually collapsed into itself, according to the incident report I received from the government through Freedom of Information. And so when that happened that day, they called for a demolition crew to just knock the rest of the house down. And ever since then, there's just been this pile of charred remains of the house on the property behind the fence with other debris and garbage. And the real estate agent hasn't been able to sell that house for some reason. 2 doors down, I noticed another house which is still standing, which may have been home for squatters. It has definitely been decorated with very large graffiti. Windows and doors have been boarded up, of course, but it's also very much one of those wild blackberry farms, and also a place where refuse has been dumped. It's a blight on the landscape. You've got these other two properties, which one has nothing there anymore, and one has a house which is basically ready to be condemned. That are both owned by people who also live in the Lower Mainland, or at least have other addresses in the Lower Mainland. The house which was burned down is owned by someone in Richmond, and the house that's still standing is owned by someone who has an address in Marine Drive in White Rock. And City Hall tells me that they have taken some action to try to get the owners to do something with these properties. The owner of the property which was destroyed by fire, they want that owner to pick up the pile of debris and clean up the property, as well as take apart the foundation, what's left of the foundation. They don't believe the foundation can stand the test of time. And they're also trying to get the owner of the other house to do something there. They've boarded up more of the house. They put more fencing up there to keep people out. But ultimately, there's got to be another solution here, because if people are just buying land, letting them go into disrepair, it harms the neighborhood. It harms property values elsewhere in the neighborhood. It takes life out of a neighborhood, and it also takes a dwelling out of the housing market, rental market, sale market. That's another house where no one can live. And as much as we do have the empty homes tax, that has encouraged some more activity of sales as well as more rentals. If you see houses like this, properties like this, which look like they're in a ghetto from Detroit somewhere, it needs to be fixed, and maybe there's got to be some brave politicians who've got to look at other remedies. I mean, if someone is paying so much money for a property that they're not using and letting it go into disrepair, could there be a mechanism to actually take away the property, to expropriate the property, and just either take it away and sell it, or take it away and write a check to the person and say, look, you're not using this. You've made no application to use this. We're taking it away and we're expropriating it under the law. We want to do something useful with this property, let someone actually live there. We've got a housing crisis. Here's a check. Please, there you go. Could that be a solution in the future? I'm just throwing that out there as something. But something has got to give, especially when you see houses like this in this neighborhood. So if you're looking for something to do on the weekend or the nighttime as the days grow shorter as we get closer to to autumn, well, you can go and look around that area, 2200 block of Southwest Marine Drive on the south side, and then 5600 block of Marine Crescent in Kerrisdale. Bring your cameras with you. You'll see things that will shock you, especially here in Vancouver, that something like this has happened to an area which used to be a little bit more lively and a little bit more well-manicured.
In Surrey, among the farmhouses, there's now a high-tech broadcasting studio. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Hubcast Media Productions was quite a revelation for me. I was on the Surrey Board of Trade's annual industry tour back in May, on a Friday in May, where they had different buses going on different routes to see some different eye-opening businesses in Surrey. Surrey really is a diverse place in so many ways, and it's a diverse place from a business standpoint. And one of the places on the bus that I went on was called Hubcast Media Productions, and it's nestled away among farms, not far from Langley. It's in an old storage building on a farm. They've turned it into a state-of-the-art broadcast studio. These are people, Peter Young is the CEO, but he, along with the rest of his team, the main members of his team, are former Shaw Communications people who, had to find some other way to continue in the broadcast world after Shaw a couple of years ago decided to shut down its community access TV channel studio in downtown Vancouver. They decided to look at technology and find a portable and mobile solution to be cost effective and cutting edge. They have this idea to replicate what they're doing out in Surrey in other parts of the world. Basically, the only thing they need is access to broadband internet, and the sky is the limit. They don't even need to have wires. They can be feeding off high-speed wireless internet in other parts of the world. And they want to do what they're doing here. I mean, they were the broadcast production team that put Vancouver Canadians baseball on Sportsnet this summer. They didn't have a big bulky truck at Nebula Stadium. They simply just had a little box that threw the signal back to the studio out in Surrey, where the technicians, the broadcast producers, put the live product together, married the pictures with the sound from the stadium. And they did that at a low price without having to have a big 18-wheeler broadcast production truck. And that's what they did. They're also the home studio for TSN's Crown Gridiron weekly talk show, and that's produced and hosted by Jim Mullen, who's worked for various mainstream broadcast companies himself, but he's also someone who discovered Hubcast Media Productions. This is the way things are going. You don't need to be in a big legacy media studio anymore with cameras that are six figures and broadcast production studios that are multi-million dollars. You can do it less equipment and get the same high quality, high production result. And we'll see if Hubcast Media Productions does reach its ambition to be everywhere around the world, to be in remote places in Africa, helping people express their creativity and tell the stories and tell the news about their communities.
Bob, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you.
My guest has been award-winning investigative reporter Bob Mackin, the publisher of thebreaker.news, his website, thebreaker.ca. If you have any questions for Bob or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet, our YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.